Picture this. It's 1943, right in the middle of World War II. A team of people are digging around in the cellar of a house in England that had burned to the ground. They weren't looking for treasure or anything like that. No, they were looking for a body. But here's where the story goes from strange to completely unbelievable. The reason they were digging in that exact spot? Well, a ghost supposedly told them to.
And you know what? They found one. Okay, we have to get into this. This is the incredible story of Borley Rectory and the chilling mystery of the bones buried beneath the floorboards. To really get our heads around this, we actually have to start near the end of the story, with that incredible discovery in the rubble, years after a mysterious fire destroyed the entire house. So this team, led by a pretty famous paranormal investigator named Harry Price, they start digging in the cellar and boom, they unearth exactly what local legends and that supposed spirit had promised, the hidden remains of a young woman. What's so wild is that there was no coffin, no official record of a burial. This wasn't a funeral. This was someone hiding a body. But this whole thing didn't start with a pile of bones. To understand how they even knew to dig in that cellar, we have to rewind the clock way back, about 60 years, to the very first family that ever lived in this huge Victorian house.
For over half a century, the Bull family, a very well-respected bunch by the way, kept reporting that they saw the same thing over and over, a silent, ghostly nun on their property. We're talking multiple people, over decades. Then things get even weirder. The next family, the Smiths, find a human skull just sitting in a cupboard. As you can imagine, they didn't stick around long. They fled in terror after less than a year.
So in 1930, the whole situation escalates a lot. It goes from just eerie sightings and weird noises to terrifying physical attacks. And this all kicks off when the new residents move in, Reverend Lionel Foister and his young wife, Marianne. This is where the story takes a really dark turn. All the activity, it seemed to zero in on Marianne Foister. We're talking about an invisible force physically assaulting her, slapping her, pushing her, even throwing her out of her own bed. And then the messages started. These desperate, almost childlike messages started getting scrawled on the walls, written by, well, nobody. They were all addressed to Marianne, with fragments like, "Marianne, please help get." It was like some trapped spirit was trying to communicate with the only person it could reach. Now, with all this chaos going on, word was bound to get out, and it did. It eventually reached Britain's most famous and, most controversial ghost hunter of the time, a guy named Harry Price. After the Foisters finally had enough and moved out, Price saw the opportunity of a lifetime. In 1937, he rented the empty rectory and put together this huge team of almost 50 different observers for what would become one of the most extensive paranormal investigations ever, a full year-long stakeout. So during this massive investigation, Price's team used a little device called a planchette. You can think of it as sort of a forerunner to the Ouija board, used to communicate with spirits. And this is the moment the entire case just breaks wide open, because what it spelled out was just astounding. The planchette started to move. It told this unbelievable story of a French nun, Marie Levert, who said she was murdered for love all the way back in the 17th century. But here's the absolute game changer. The spirit gave the investigators a treasure map to her own secret grave, pinpointing the exact spot right there in the cellar. Just 2 years later, in 1939, Borley Rectory burned to the ground. But that fire didn't end the story. In a weird way, it was just setting the stage for the final act. Because after the fire, Harry Price went back to the ruins to dig in that one spot in the cellar. And this brings us right back to where we started. A ghost told him where to dig. He dug. And the bones were there, exactly where the spirit of Marie Levert said they would be. So what do you do with a story like this? Was it a real honest-to-God haunting or just an incredibly elaborate hoax? I mean, the debate still goes on today. On one hand, you have more than 60 years of witnesses from different families who were genuinely terrified. But on the other hand, you have Harry Price, who loved the spotlight, and Marianne Foister, who later admitted she faked some of the stuff just to convince her husband to leave. But here's what it all comes down to. You can say the witnesses were lying, you can say the investigators were cheating, you can throw out every single spooky story they ever told, but there's one piece of hard, physical evidence left over that nobody has ever been able to explain away.
How do you explain the bones?